Okay, welcome to October 1941, and now we get weather rules. So, each turn in the game, there's a dice roll to establish what the weather is in each of 4 zones on the board. Russia falls into a single zone. The northern desert in Africa is always good weather, regardless of the time of year, so you don't actually roll for that. Northern Europe has one zone, and the Mediterranean countries have another. There are 3 types of weather: fair, poor, and severe. So we have poor at the moment, and this is normal. So generally speaking, in the year, June will tend to be fair, better than 50% chance. July, August and September will always be fair weather. So that's the moment of the big German offensive. You get 3 months of clear weather. October and November tend to be poor weather, and then the next 3 months tend to be severe. That's the Russian winter. So what effect does weather have? Well, when the weather turns poor or severe, there's one immediate huge impact. You can no longer launch mobile attacks. You have to launch assaults, which of course end the activation for that unit. And those assaults cost +2 movement points instead of +1 movement point. So you're not getting a lot of attacks in any of these big sweeping advances where you punch through lines and then encircle units. They're not happening. It's still possible to encircle a unit, it's just much, much harder, and it requires a lot more units to do it. You also get combat modifiers. So you get a -2 for air combats, which tends to make them a bit more of a grind. You get a -1 in poor weather to all your attacks. And you get and in severe weather, both the attacker and the defender get their dice roll halved, rounded up. So it's very hard to get dramatic results, such as defender depleted or destroyed in severe weather. Almost everything comes down to small shifts in position. The other thing that happens is tank and air advantages are significantly reduced. So in fair weather, tanks get a +2. They only get a +1 in poor weather, and they get no bonuses in severe. Air power is reduced to a +1 for ground support in poor weather, and it's simply eliminated in severe weather. When a tank goes in as a supporting element in an assault, it retains its normal +2 bonus. So you can still put together quite a significant bonus with the Germans if you do what I failed to do in this game, which is concentrate your 4 panzer units as the poor weather goes in. So September 1941, you want to be concentrating your 4 panzer units in a particular location. Now, let's have a look at things. The first thing to note is we can still surround the USSR's 23rd Infantry, because we can get a unit here. Oh, no, we can't. No. The first thing to notice is we can't easily surround any of the Soviet units. They are all protected from envelopment by nearby other units. So any attack we're going to make is going to be going head-on into the enemy. If we're going to do that, we might as well be trying to capture towns, because we're unlikely to be killing units. Towns will give us additional morale effects. Now, due to an error in the system, the national will for the Soviets is currently recorded as 45. This is a problem that's being fixed by the developers at the moment. But it means that we need to take 1 point off them to push them into the area where the Germans win the game. And that means any town. Let me first of all rule out Leningrad at the top. Leningrad is a fortress, and forts give various advantages to the defender, including that they don't have to retreat on a DR result. So taking Leningrad would be a matter of gathering panzer armies, hitting it with overwhelming air support. That's not happening. Fortresses don't exert a zone of control. That's actually quite important. It's a really easy rule to miss, and it has an important effect here. Look at this German unit's movement. It can move to here. Now, it shouldn't normally be able to move to here because of a zone of control here, but fortresses don't exert one. And that means we've got a possibility of surrounding this unit. So put the 16th in there. You'll notice the 16th can't launch an attack. That's the effect of the extra movement required. Third Panzer can launch an attack, but we want that unit surrounded before we do so. We also want to get every possible advantage we can, so we want that Soviet plane disabled before we carry out the assault. We don't have any local air power, so we're going to have to bring air power from somewhere else. From Smolensk, 3-5, we can support that attack. So there we are in Smolensk. Job 1, suppress this Soviet fighter. Now you'll notice both sides get the -2 poor weather bonus, so the German unit is on -2, the Soviet unit is on -6. We're going to expect basically to trade one sortie for one sortie here. Exactly like that. Right. Almost regardless of what we roll, our dice rolls are both going to be 1. We do have a 1 in 6 chance of getting fair weather next month, but it is absolutely not something we should be counting on. So we have to do this as an assault. You have to click on the yellow arrow. If you try to click on the enemy unit, you'll get only assault in poor or severe weather. Might as well find out what happens. You have to press confirm attack before you can add any units in. We add the air in. The Soviets might as well add a tank. Right? You know, I've been saying they hold them for counterattacks, but they're not going to be making counterattacks in this weather. So we get no effect. So we got to defend a retreat. But we've cut off the unit's retreat, so now it's taking a step loss. There is some nuance and subtlety to this. There's a question mark over whether or not in bad weather you should leave the enemy retreat spaces open, because what you're interested in doing is capturing the ground rather than taking out the unit. In this particular case, I think we're really only interested in killing the unit, so right, our objective is to do that. Now we see a problem. First Panzer can't actually launch an attack there. Because of that, normally 4 movement points would be enough to attack that space, but in poor weather we need an extra movement point, and we don't have it. Second infantry can't either. So that's it. That attack is over. We've not actually succeeded in getting the unit. So we're placing this German unit here just to bottle up the Leningrad. Oh, we did remarkably well there. We got a defender disrupted, so not only do we force them out, but we get to go in. Now, if you click on the space of the attacking unit, you don't advance in. If you click on the space that you were attacking, the attacking unit advances in. But anybody who participated in the attack can advance in, and if we want the panzer to be the one on the spearhead, which we almost certainly do, click on its assault arrow, and it's the unit that moves into the space. So the maximum number of units that can be committed to an assault is 3. So potentially you can get +2 for committing additional infantry units, or you could get up to +4 for committing 2 additional tank or shock units. Right. If I put the 17th Infantry in there, it's going to be relatively easy to cut off his only retreat. But I can't put this unit, which is the 9th, in there because it would open a gap in the line. The line is already quite weak here. I should have reinforced this. In fact, I'm probably going to pull this German unit back afterwards in order to shore that up a little bit. The issue with the line being weak here is that when a unit begins in a zone of control, it's allowed to leave it. So the 21st can move from this position to this position, even though it's moving between 2 zones of control. Now, it wouldn't be able to do that later in the turn, but because it begins in one of the zones of control. And that would then cut off this unit as well. So that would give room for a fairly significant Soviet counterattack, because they'd be able to get multiple attacks in on this unit. And they would be threatening on a subsequent turn to overrun that Luftwaffe base. So I'm going to advance the Hungarian unit in because it's expendable. And then what I'm going to do is move to there. I'm not going to bother with the attack. That has no realistic chance of doing anything worthwhile. So now the line is shored up by falling back a hex. So the Soviet turn. Now, the first thing to say is this unit is in a lot of trouble as it stands. However, the situation changes slightly in bad weather. In bad weather, it's much harder for the Germans to make serious progress, and therefore the Soviets can afford to try and maintain a very close line with the German units. Now, obviously, they're running a risk that 1 in 6 chance that next turn's weather is really good. Let's have a quick look. Oh, yes. Yeah, the Soviets are going to be mobilising a lot of units this turn. So they don't need to be holding any of their towns. They can just put fresh units into those. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the unit from Bologoy here. And I'm going to advance it to here. So we're just going to reorganise this line slightly. We don't particularly fancy letting units through to Kursk. So what's our best way to do this? I think our best way to do this is probably just to sacrificially put the units out in front of the towns. We want to move a minimal number of units because we still want enough units to mobilise anything new that arrives. This is definitely worth an attack. We'll give the Hungarians a bit of ground support. So if you can get to a -2 overall, and on this attack we are at a +1 overall. If you can get to a -2 overall, there's a chance of forcing the other side to retreat, and that might be tactically important. Importantly, there are no attacker destroyed results on the combat table. It doesn't matter how bad the odds that you are committing at. The worst that's going to happen is that the primary unit launching the attack is going to suffer an attrition. For the Allied player, that's much less important than the Axis player, because as long as the unit is still in supply, then you're going to be fine. You're just going to rebuild the step loss at the end of the turn before the Germans get any chance to take advantage of it. Okay, so I was moving these 2 units up here because what I want to do is create a supply path for the 23rd back out of its little pocket so that it at least doesn't get a no supply marker at the end of the turn. And also remove any isolate bonus that the Germans are getting. You know, the odds of that helping it's slim, but it means it will be able to recover the step loss, which then means that it will usually take 2 attacks to actually eliminate it. So I might as well make it as hard as possible for the Germans to actually take that position. Since I was moving the 2 units anyway, I committed assaults, but that's a panzer unit there, and we're not likely to get anything valuable out of it. So we are -1 to the Germans, +3, so -4. Right, and so we suffer an attacker attrition. We pass with to happen is the relatively long winter period. That's the moment at which the Germans replace their air power. Quite often that requires you to pull the German air power back from the front line a little bit so that the Allies can't just fight airstrikes for the purposes of keeping you disabled and using up production points. But this is the moment when you're refreshing it so that when you get to June next year, you will have fresh aircraft to support that initial attack. anything with the aircraft. And the reason for that is down here. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new units. I want the 7 units on the board more than I want aircraft in bad weather. And I only have 11 production points. 2 of those new units are shock armies, right? And I believe that light motorised and armoured, they take an extra production point. We'll find out in a second. But we can't afford to activate any of those. You need to be aware of this whenever you're looking at things. If I spend the production points here, will I have them to do something else later? So, let's decide where we are committed. Army only actually takes 1 point to activate. That's good to know. I did, as I was playing out the final few turns, record a bit of information about some of the scenario special rules, and then the recording didn't quite work. But that's good news. I get to show you an additional feature of Board Game Arena that's extremely useful, or at least useful if you are serious about getting better at playing a game, which I realise is a slightly odd thing to be saying in this context because wargames players are not generally serious competitive players. I mean, let's be honest, if you were a serious competitive player who was interested in challenging, pitting your wits against an opponent, you'd be playing chess or Go. You wouldn't be playing a 60-page rulebook wargame. But this feature's still really useful. If you bring up the game that you have previously played, you have a replay game option here. When you click on the replay game, it brings this up and you select a player whose perspective you want to see the events from, because of course some games look different depending on which player you are, and it takes you to the beginning of the game. So we have go back to the first move, go to the end of the game, next move. We also underneath have an advanced replay features. So just turn that on, and that adds a couple of options to us. The one we're interested in is show game history, which takes us down to the bottom of the page where we have the game log that Board Game Arena creates for every game. This is a text file that just tells you what moves are taken in what order with timestamps. So we need to scroll down through that, and we'll get down to about move 770. Here we are. And that's the start of November 1941, and that's where I'd got up to. And if you click on that move, the computer will start to replay the game for you. So you can see it's beginning to act. Now you can't actually see anything happening. What you need to do is grab the slide bar at the side and go right the way back up to the top, and now you can see it's replaying the game in front of you, which is quite fun. It's a little bit hard because you can't really control the pace of this. Obviously, I'm recording this. I could then slow it down or speed it up in the editing software. The other thing is, it takes quite a long time because this is a long game. It doesn't usually take this long, but Board Game Arena is designed around relatively light Euro games, and you'd play through the whole game at this sort of pace in maybe 30-40 seconds. But for a serious war game like this, you're looking at, I think it took 10-12 minutes for me to get through to the point in the game where I actually wanted to start recording again. So essentially I went away, made myself a cup of tea, came back and waited for it to finish off. But I already have that section of the game set up, so let's stop this and go to here. So now we're in December 1941, and you can see where the front line is. There we are. And you can also see the German line is very thin. The Soviet line is significantly thicker. The Soviets have a lot more troops available. The other thing to note is the national will. This scenario hinges on national will. The Soviets currently have 40 points. If they finish the game with 44 or less, then they lose and the German player wins. Obviously, you can't magically bring the units back to life and recover any national will from lost units, but you can recover national will by recapturing towns. And there are 3 occupied towns here, here, and here on the German front line. So the Soviets want to try and recapture that. Now, up to this point in the game, the chance of the Soviets winning any sort of face-on fight with the Germans is pretty low. But a special rule kicks in December 1941, which is the Russian winter. What it does is it switches the weather conditions to severe in this zone, but for all purposes, the Russian player is only considered to have poor weather conditions, which means that while the German player has their dice rolls halved, the Russian player only gets a -1 when they're attacking and no penalty at all when they're defending. And while the German player gets no air support and no tank bonuses, the Russian player still gets bonuses for shock troops and for throwing in air support. So let's follow through what happened next. What you do is you click this button at the top here and it takes you forward 1 move at a time. So we've got the Germans trying to restabilise the position. What they're looking for is to minimise the Soviet counterattack, either by securing hexes that would allow the Soviets to get more troops around a location, or pushing the Soviets back. At this stage, the best you can possibly hope for is to force a retreat on a Soviet unit. And here we go. This illustrates what's going on. We have the combat odds as normal, +2 for being German, -1 for attacking rough terrain, +1 for an additional attacker. The Axis roll 5, they roll a 5 on the die, they get a +2, that's 7, but then they round down because it's severe weather, which means that their final result is 4. The Soviets just roll their dice as normal, add their +0. Now, here they roll very badly, so they get to defend a retreat anyway. And the unit goes back to there. And the Germans here shove the Panzer into the gap, which reduces the number of attacking units that can get at the town. It is going to cause 4th Panzer to get surrounded. But remember, if a unit is killed, it just goes back onto your player board and it's remobilised at the end of the next turn. It's inconvenient, but it's not in any way fatal. Don't be too precious with your units. Then fill in the gap. Check for supply. Occasionally while you're replaying, you'll get this red bar comes up that says you must make a certain move. Just ignore it and let it go away. It's to do with the tutorial system that exists on Board Game Arena, and I don't know why it keeps sticking itself into replays in this sort of way. So now we're looking at the Soviet turn, so we're sweeping round and attempting to try and dislodge the German unit from that town. So the Soviets have options here. First of all, they've got 2 additional attackers, so because it's an assault, they have to add those first. They've added those. Now they can commit events. Every standard Soviet infantry unit can be committed a tank counter, and in poor weather what that does is it moves the additional unit from providing a +1 to providing a +2. No effect. So the Soviets have lots of opportunity for counterattack here, but to be fair, they won't be particularly successful. They'll get a lot of no effects, a lot of attacker stops, and they're still suffering under poor weather, so they can still only make 1 attack per unit per turn, and they generally need to group their units to have a realistic chance of success. So don't get your hopes up. You're not going to get to reverse the situation and have the kind of counterattacks that the Germans had at the beginning of this scenario. But they've managed to push this German unit back here and force it in. That's pushing in, turning the town into more and more of a salient. So in total, the Soviet player will get 2 rounds of this, 2 rounds of counterattack opportunities. They need to be a little bit careful. The Germans have not lost their teeth entirely. Oh, another defender retreat. And careful use of the shock armies is important. Shock armies provide a +2 when they are attacking. This here is a mistake. I just want to make that clear. This is an error that I made with the Russians at this point. I don't want to kill that panzer unit. Well, it'd be nice to kill the panzer unit, but that's not actually my main objective. And I'm not cutting off its supply, because its supply can move back to the 18th Infantry, here, and then out along the supply line. So if I cause a step loss by launching this attack, the panzer unit's just going to rebuild at the end of the turn, and it's still going to be in the way. What I actually want to do here is occupy that hex to create a 3-way attack on this town. So I shouldn't be cutting off the panzer's retreat. I should be allowing the panzer to escape. That's actually a really important thing, tactical thing to bear in mind whenever you're playing this game. Very, very often you want to cut off enemy units' retreats, because what you want to do is damage or destroy the enemy unit, because that weakens the whole enemy line. But there are lots of situations where what you actually want to do is occupy a space, and getting an outright defender eliminated is so unlikely that the only realistic way you're going to do that is to give the opponent an escape square. You'll notice that the German player is now down to 2 aircraft in this phase. That's because at the end of November, in this scenario, the Germans are required to give up one of their Luftwaffe, which is being sent off to the Mediterranean to help Rommel out. And you'll notice here that I've moved the German unit from this position to this position, and the reason for that is simply to stop the Soviets getting additional units in here. The winter phases tend to lead to an interesting reversal in the game, because the Soviets get all their units back and they're now available, and their counterattacks are generally done by committing large numbers of units to an attack on a particular space. The Soviet player now begins to run short of production points to activate all of their units and mobilise and reinforce units that are damaged. But the German player actually wants to just to hold whatever ground they captured in the last year, and occasionally give a little bit up just to make sure that they shore up their line and that nothing bad happens. But essentially, the German player is just trying to wait out the winter months. So we can see the Soviets just recaptured this town, and their national will went back up to 42 from 40. So the Germans are just trying to wait out the winter months, and during that period they want to recover the Luftwaffe units to full strength so that they're available for next June when you begin to get good weather again. And they want to avoid getting large numbers of units cut off or killed, or losing large amounts of territory. But they don't have to move very much, so they tend to have plenty of production points for everything they want to do. Whereas, of course, in the summer months, the Germans are desperately short of production points, because during their large sweeping advances, they're trying to activate all of their units almost every turn. There we go, and that's the end of the Soviet counterattacks. You can see they did make quite a bit of ground around Kursk. They did retake one of the towns, but they didn't do enough to get back to 45 points. And it's the end of the game. And a victory for the German player. So I realise that this is going to have been a monster video. Well, the USSR 1941 scenario is an incredibly useful training scenario. First of all, it's also the first scenario which you can play against another human being that's actually an interesting competitive game between the two players. So there's that as well. But if you've played through this a couple of times solo and then probably against some humans, you'll have a really solid understanding of the way the ground combats work, when and where to commit air power, what are likely to be good attacks, the ways in which you try to combine retreats to surround enemy units, when you use assaults versus when you use mobile attacks, the effect weather has on combat, and also the difference between being the smaller but more powerful force, as the Germans are here, and as the Allies are late in the war, and the weaker force, which is just trying to give ground while not collapsing, as the Soviets are here, and actually on the East Front, as the Germans become in 1943. So everything you learn about Soviet retreat at this point is actually a valuable lesson for German retreat in 1943. I will see you next time.